Welcome to the 73rd episode of I Wrote This News. Today is Monday, March 21st, 2022. It's Monday and time to do it all again. Here's the news. Story number 1, That's Not My God, Mr. Facing stiff resistance in Ukraine and crippling economic sanctions at home. Russian President Vladimir Putin is using language that recalls the rhetoric from Joseph Stalin's show trials of the 1930s. With his hopes for a blitz in Ukraine shattered and economic costs mounting swiftly, Putin unleashed a venomous diatribe at those who oppose his course. In a call on Wednesday with top officials, Putin spewed, quote, "The Russian people will always be able to distinguish true patriots from scum and traitors and will simply spit them out like a gnat that accidentally flew into their mouths. Spit them out on the pavement. I am convinced that such a natural and necessary self-purification of society will only strengthen our country, our solidarity, cohesion and readiness to respond to any challenges." The coarse language carried ominous parallels for those familiar with Soviet history. During show trials of Stalin's Great Terror, authorities disparaged the declared enemies of the people as reptiles or mad dogs. His voice strained by anger, Putin charged that Russians who opposed the war in Ukraine were a fifth column obsequiously serving Western interests and ready to sell their own mother. Putin later appeared at a huge flag-waving rally at a Moscow stadium Friday and praised his country's troops in biblical terms as they rained lethal fire on Ukraine's cities. Putin said, quote, "Shoulder to shoulder, they help and support each other. We have not had unity like this for a long time." The event included patriotic songs, including a performance of Made in the USSR. With the opening lines Ukraine and Crimea, Belarus and Moldova, it's all my country. And then maybe Romania or Poland or Slovakia. Is it really all Putin's country? Seeking to portray the war as just, Putin paraphrased the Bible to say of Russia's troops, "There is no greater love than giving up one's soul for one's friends." And he continued to insist his actions were necessary to prevent genocide, a claim flatly denied by leaders around the globe. Here's the full passage from the Bible that Putin seems to be parroting. "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. These things I command you, so that you will love one another." At least 600 civilians have been killed in Russia's attack on Ukraine, with many more unaccounted for. More than 3 million people have fled the fighting in Ukraine. That's a strange kind of love for one another. Story number 2, Atta boycott. In his address to the U.S. Congress last week, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called for all American companies to stop doing business in Russia. Zelensky said, quote, "All American companies must leave Russia. Leave their market immediately, because it is flooded with our blood." He went on to ask lawmakers to, quote, "make sure that the Russians do not receive a single penny that they use to destroy our people in Ukraine. The destruction of our country, the destruction of Europe. Peace is more important than income." A few days later, Washington Post columnist Dana Milbank reported on the work of Yale University's Jeffrey Sonnenfeld. Sonnenfeld has compiled an authoritative list of corporate actions in Russia, with specific focus on those companies who have dug in and decided to keep doing business there. Sonnenfeld told Milbank that those companies are, quote, "funding the Russian war machine, and they are undermining the whole idea of the sanctions. The whole idea is to freeze up civil society, to get people out on the streets and outraged. They're undermining an effective resolution and increasing the likelihood of continued bloodshed." But as Robert Wright notes in his non-zero newsletter, the instinct towards retribution and moral outrage may actually get in the way of making things better in Ukraine, or at least in the way of not making things worse. Wright writes, quote, "The impulse behind the West's robust military support for Ukraine, and behind its sanctions on Russia, is understandable. When we see people do bad things, like invade countries and kill lots of innocent people, it's natural to want not only to help the victims but to punish the criminals. The retributive instinct is a deeply embedded part of human nature." Wright continues, quote, "This unreliability of the retributive instinct is one reason we should demand that our political leaders justify, in pragmatic terms, policies that have a partly retributive impetus. Explain to us how this is supposed to work out in the end. Do we think Ukraine can actually win? Or are we trying to strengthen its hand at the negotiating table? Is that one goal of the sanctions? 2. How long could the war go on if there's no negotiated deal?" It may be that there are answers to these questions that are reassuring, but it's hard to say because they haven't been much discussed. We seem to be just going with our gut. Gentle listener, this is a bit of tough sledding. Should our actions be animated by our moral instincts, or should we focus more on their likely effects? And if it's the latter, how do we know how far to go? I suspect no one really knows, but framing the discussion around trying to answer those questions may be worth the effort. March 21st is the 80th day of the year in the Gregorian calendar. 285 days remain until the end of the year. Today is National Rosie the Riveter Day. Rosie the Riveter is an allegorical cultural icon of World War II. Representing the women who worked in factories and shipyards during World War II, many of whom produced munitions and war supplies. These women sometimes took entirely new jobs, replacing the male workers who joined the military. Rosie the Riveter is used as a symbol of American feminism and women's economic advantage. Now it's time for On This Date in History. On this date in 1861, Alexander Stephens, Vice President of the Confederate States of America, gives the cornerstone speech in Savannah, Georgia. In that speech, Stephens defended slavery as a fundamental and just result of the supposed inferiority of the black race. In particular, he stated that, quote, "Our new government's foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition. This, our new government, is the first in the history of the world, based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth." A month later, the Civil War began. 4 years and 1 million casualties later, the Confederacy was defeated and dissolved. 1925, the Butler Act prohibits the teaching of human evolution in Tennessee. The act was a Tennessee law prohibiting public school teachers from denying the biblical account of mankind's origin. The law also prevented the teaching of the evolution of man from what it referred to as lower orders of animals in place of the biblical account. The law remained in place until its repeal in 1967. 1943, Wehrmacht officer Rudolf von Gersdorf plots to assassinate Adolf Hitler by using a suicide bomb. The plan hinged on a tour of an armory of captured Soviet weapons that Gersdorf was slated to give Hitler. Gersdorf set off 2 10-minute delayed fuses on explosive devices hidden in his coat pockets. His plan was to throw himself around Hitler in a death embrace that would blow them both up. Contrary to expectations, Hitler raced through the armory in less than 10 minutes. After he had left the building, Gersdorf was able to defuse the devices in a public bathroom at the last second. After the attempt, he was immediately transferred back to the Eastern Front, where he managed to evade suspicion. 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. leads 3,200 people on the start of the third and finally successful Civil Rights March from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. 1986, Debbie Thomas became the first African American to win the World Figure Skating Championships. 2006, the social media site Twitter is founded. Celebrating birthdays today are actress Marie-Christine Barrault, singer Rose Stone, actor Timothy Dalton, Russian war apologist Sergei Lavrov, actor Gary Oldman, actor Matthew Broderick, and tennis player Karolina Pliskova. Happy birthday to all of them, and if your birthday is today, a very happy birthday to you as well. By the way, if you or someone you know is having a birthday and would like us to announce it on the show, leave us a voice message or send an email. The links are in the show notes. Today's news was brought to us by ABC News, the Associated Press, Axios, the Bible, and the website that I'd swear on a stack of, Wikipedia. If you have a comment or a question about anything you've heard today, or if you have a suggestion, please send us a note at IWTN, all one word, at thatradioshow.com. That email address one more time is IWTN, all one word, at thatradioshow.com.
One more thing, if this podcast sounds a little funny, that's because it's also an experiment. All of the vocals were generated using AI technology. Hopefully the show will sound different and better as the tech improves and as we improve at using it. I'm Bob Meese, hoping you have an amazing day. We'll get together again soon.